Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the new Renaissance podcast. So, another Riverside episode this week, episode 21. The feedback from the last episode was absolutely outstanding. Thank you to everyone who enjoyed it. Today's episode is going to be a good one as well. Today's guest, we've got performance nutritionist Edward Tooley. He's just launched his own plant-based sleeping drink product known as Hibernate, which is what we're going to go through today. But he's also very clued up on the ways that sleep is so beneficial to people's performance and everyday life. And they're the kind of things that we're going to dive into today. But before we get straight stuck into it, Ed, would you like to introduce yourself and kind of give a background on the product and your journey into being a performance nutritionist?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you for inviting me on, Dylan. You know, we only met the other week when working at a gym and speaking to you about the sleep product. But, the opportunity to come on the pod's brilliant. Myself, I'm a performance nutritionist. I've worked in elite sport for 16 years now. And when I say that, I've headed up a National Rugby Union team. I spent eight years working with the England Rugby League, 8 seasons with Wigan Warriors. I've worked with track athletes, boxers, currently working with the Jordan Taekwondo Federation. So I've done 2 Olympic cycles with them. And I'm also with a football team over in France. And then, more recently, alongside my applied work, I've also been working with 3 others, where we developed the plant-based sleep aid drink, like you said, called Hibernate, which we launched in March this year. So now I've got a nice blend between my applied work and then also the sleep drink.
Yeah, amazing. And obviously, with yourself being a performance nutritionist, you can obviously see the massive improvement in individuals' performance when it comes to having better quality sleep. But also, I don't think people realize that there is a benefit just to everyday life as well for the person who's potentially just working the 9 to 5. There was something that I pulled up, which I was going to speak about, which was like the average hours of sleep per night in the UK has gone down something like 2 or 3 hours in the last 5 or 6 years. And people are averaging around about 5 to 7 hours of sleep per night. Like, what is the ideal amount of sleep that people should be aiming for, and when it does get too low, why is that an issue?
Yeah, so I think no matter what environment I've gone into through my career, sleep has been an issue. So that's whether it's going into a Premiership football team and doing my needs analysis, and the biggest thing being sleep, not nutrition, as the issue, or going into a corporate setting. And like you highlighted, it's in the UK, we're down to, I think it's about, the average is 5.7 hours per night, when we should be looking up around the 8-hour mark. But that's global as well. So we're on diminishing hours of actual sleep. Recently, a sleep expert from the Institute of Sleep in Denmark has suggested we should be having closer to the 9 hours sleep rather than the 8 hours that has been posed for a number of years now. And I think as soon as we start cutting down our sleep cycles, we're missing out on crucial phases. So sleep's basically broken down into, you've got light sleep, you've got your deep sleep phase, and you've got your REM phase, which is rapid eye movement phase, where you would be dreaming typically. Now, towards the start of the night, you get more deep sleep. Towards the end of the night, you get more REM phase. Now, the REM phase is particularly your memory consolidation and things like that. So as soon as we cut down our sleep window from that 8 or 9 hours that's recommended, we start missing out on the REM phase. A little bit deep, but predominantly REM phase. So it's going to have a massive impact on our day. It's going to have an impact on our decision. It's going to have an impact on our learnings and all of those things. It just keeps on coming with the studies. Nuffield Health do a really good national health index on an annual basis, and it's dropping down every year. To last year's was 5.7 hours per night, which is way under.
Yeah, it's ridiculously under. And I think we were just speaking about before we obviously come on the podcast today how it's kind of a trend or a personality trait in the UK to be that busy that you can run off these low hours of sleep because you're a busy individual who's either self-employed or trying to make ends meet with the job and then training afterwards, and people who are trying to pushed for performance as well. They've got that no days off mentality that they need to get up at 4 a.m. and not have that much sleep. Is that where you think there might be some issue coming from, potentially people not prioritising it as much as they need to, or is that just from lack of education?
Yeah, I think we're almost. I think you hit the nail on the head there. We're almost taught that if you're to be successful, you've got to be busy, and sleep is the one thing that gets overlooked.
Yeah.
Rather than having good sleep and waking up fresh and being super productive, instead we're just busy. So things may take a little bit longer. Obviously we need to fit in workouts and stuff like that to be physically fit as well and look after our mental health. And then we've got other responsibilities, children, pets, multiple jobs, all of those things. But I think, we've got busy lifestyles. We try and fit more and more in, which becomes difficult because I think myself growing up, it was very much when your parents' 9 to 5 was a 9 to 5 job. But now we've got emails on our phones, colleagues have got constant contact with you, or we're working more globally. So people are in different hours. Our work is extended beyond the 9 to 5 job.
Yeah.
And I think as soon as you take sleep out of the equation, people become tired, they lose a bit of productivity, and quite often they hit caffeine or something like that to try and patch the tiredness rather than address the cause.
And what issue would caffeine potentially have on sleep? Obviously, it has shown to have its benefits. It has shown to be something that people can look towards when they're trying to boost and enhance the performance. But is that something that's used too late on in the day? Is that something that people look towards using too much? Where is the pitfall with caffeine?
Yeah, I think, caffeine does have its benefits, doesn't it? It's got both its, like you said, the performance benefits, for its focus, and from a physical point of view, it's beneficial there as well. But then you take it too late in the day, and the half-life of caffeine, spreading over a good few hours, it can impact how you get to sleep and the quality of your sleep. So what we tend to see is someone has some caffeine first thing in the morning, to address that initial tiredness and get them going in the day. And then as that drops off, they can feel that lull hit in, and then they have a bit more caffeine. So if that caffeine's going, if we were looking at someone going to bed at 10 o'clock, if that caffeine's going beyond 2 o'clock in the afternoon, then it's going to impact that 10 o'clock bedtime. And what we see is people having it late in the afternoon, or even more so these late night workouts, high rocks workouts, fantastic. It's something that's very inclusive and there's big communities around it. But the workouts have become competitive as well. And people are going into it tired and will have some caffeine very late on at 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. And it's going to cause them to struggle to get to sleep. So the latency around getting to sleep is going to extend, and then the quality of sleep is going to be disrupted as well. So as a result, they get poor sleep and they slip into the same cycle again.
So, sorry for interrupting the podcast. I just wanted to come on and say a massive shout out to Hibernate for their drinks, because they've massively helped me with my sleep quality. About 2 weeks ago, I was tracking on my Oura Ring and I realised that my REM sleep was around about 20 to 30 minutes on average per night. Now, I got in touch with Hibernate and managed to get some of the drinks. I had them pre-bed, and my REM sleep has now managed to go to 1 hour and sometimes even 1 hour 30 every single night. Now, you can do exactly the same. You don't need to change the amount of time that you're in bed, but what you can do is change what you do before bed to get a better quality sleep. So what I've managed to do is get a 10% discount code for Hibernate's new drinks, new sachets, so you can have both hot and cold drinks before bed that are going to help with your melatonin production, which is going to put you into a more relaxed state, ready to have a better deep and REM sleep. If you want to get your hands on this 10% code, then all you have to do is click the link below or use the code TNR-POD10 at Hibernate8 when you check out. That's TNR-POD10 at checkout at Hibernate. And that will give you less than £3 per can on those supplements, which are absolutely unbelievable. For everyone that does try and does use the code, drop it in the comments. Let me know what you think and what you find out when you actually use the supplement. Does it help you with your sleep? Because I always like hearing people's feedback. But that's enough from me. Let's get straight back into this episode, because it's an absolute banger. Yeah, and I'm not 100% sure if this is 100% what I'm going to come at you with now, but I've always been told as well, and I think I've seen it once or twice in studies, that caffeine is something that acts on your adenosine system first thing in the morning, and that's not even going to be activated up until around about 90 minutes upon waking or something along those lines. So I know that I recommend to a lot of my clients and a lot of people who I've coached in the past something like an electrolyte drink or some form of salt to wake you up. And then as you progress on into the day, going into that caffeine, but then trying to limit it to around about not going past the 2 to 3 p.m. mark, because that caffeine then should still have an impact on that evening session.
Yeah, that's right. I think first thing in the morning, it's kind of habitual to have that coffee when you get up. But if you can basically wake yourself up with movement and light, and like you said, normal hydration, especially having an electrolyte drink, something like that, helping you rehydrate after that period of not drinking during the night, that's going to be more beneficial to you. And then having the coffee when you get to work, or having it mid-morning or lunchtime, but not too late in the afternoon, like you said. Now, obviously, this shifts if people's days are different. So say a shift worker that's working during the night, same principle applies to them. It's just different times of the day. But yeah, it's if people can wake up using light and movement, and then use food and hydration until their body's had a chance to get going, sort of 90 minutes, 2 hours before into their day, then use that caffeine, like you said there, having the coffee.
Yeah, and I think another thing that you just touched on there with nutrition, like those people who are potentially going into those evening sessions or workouts, sometimes they can feel lethargic and tired, but it's because they're fueling themselves on a meal deal sandwich at dinner. And obviously, that's not going to provide them the right nutrients and energy to go into that session. So then they look for something that's a quick fix like caffeine. So sometimes it's trying to look at the low hanging fruit of, are you actually eating good quality nutrition that's fueling you for your performance? Because sometimes you don't need that caffeine. I find that a lot with people who, when I've worked with bodybuilders and been mentored by them, that when they get to a certain amount of calories and they're trying to build muscle, the caffeine that they used to have for the workouts, they don't even feel like they want it anymore, because the calories are so high and they're providing them that much energy.
That's it. And I mean, looking at it from my sports perspective with my teams and athletes, it's very simple from there, because we've got chefs and cooks putting on breakfast, lunch, snacks or supplements in between, so they're getting fed well. Even though they're doing multiple training sessions during the day, they are getting good nutrients at every mealtime. Whereas someone that's in the corporate setting, or doing shift work, they may not necessarily be fueling themselves correctly, or even the basics of hydrating correctly. You speak to a lot of people, and I'm sure you see it in your clients as well, that if you were to say, right, what colour's your pee? Quite often people are in a dehydrated state. Now, obviously that slows down how fast oxygen gets around the body, how the nutrients from when you've eaten get around the body, and people are going to be more sluggish. So like you said, we get to those evening sessions where we're going to get our training in, which is super important. But instead of going, right, I'm going to have a banana or a flapjack 45 minutes beforehand because my lunch wasn't great, they'll go, right, caffeine it is. I'll have a 200 milligram shot. And then they wonder why they struggle to get to sleep at 1 a.m.
Yeah. Mate, you see it all the time. And then the caffeine that potentially people in that corporate world where they're having their coffees all day are just going to dehydrate them even more as well. If you had to give a worst meal for somebody to have in the evening before they went to sleep, what would it be and why?
It would be if it was quite close for them to get to sleep. And this is quite often seen now, isn't it, with the late night gym sessions and things like that. People would tend to eat quite late. It would be a heavy fat meal. Obviously, it's slower to digest, and that would be the reason why. Because obviously, when you go to sleep, your blood moves away from digesting food. So that food's going to sit on you, and you're not going to get the best out of your nutrition. So if you are training late and then eating late as a result, I'd be looking at something that's fairly easy to digest. A lighter meat or fish or alternative, plant-based alternative. And then a nice blend of carbohydrates and vegetables. I think quite often the veg gets neglected and the carbs get overeaten, and quite often that can put a lot of contents in our stomach from that point of view. So I'd be looking at something that's easier to digest if we were going to eat quite close to the bedtime period.
Yeah, because I think so many people can think that they need to get those meals in, like you mentioned, if they're training in the evening, or some people don't have the choice, but they're waking up in the morning, they're bloated, they're lethargic, they've not had the best night's sleep. But like you said, if they're trying to cram in a meal which is full of dietary fat, which is one of the hardest macronutrients for the body to digest, that, like you said, and you've just taught me something there, that the blood's obviously going to pull away from that area when you're sleeping for your body to try and recover, but it's having to work overtime when you're supposed to be resting.
Yeah, that's it.
What about phone screen time? So I've seen a study, and it was that the average UK adult is on their phone for 7 to 8 hours, and the average time in bed, like we've just mentioned, is 5.7 hours. So people are looking at the phone screen more time than they're in bed at the minute.
That's it. It's scary. I always get a bit nervous when Apple give me my report on a Monday.
The weekly
Uh,
update.
well, that's it, and it's I find quite, because obviously I've got my nutrition business and phlebotomy services, and then I've got Hibernate as well. So quite often I am on the go and I'm working from my phone, but then it's the how it then creeps into the rest of your life when you're trying to unwind and watching a bit of TV, or you're unwinding before bed, brushing your teeth and doing that sort of evening routine, and it's check the phone, or I've got a message, these sort of things, or you end up watching a few reels, that sort of thing. It does creep up on you. And obviously if you're using it late at night, you've got that blue light effect. So if we've got a lot of light stimulation coming from screens especially, then it can having a negative effect on our melatonin production. So melatonin being our sleep hormone. Typically, if you were to think of that you were in the wilderness, as the sun's going down and it's getting darker, our melatonin levels go up
Yeah.
because the sun's brightness would reduce our production. Now, obviously, now we've got artificial light that can have an impact on our sleep hormone production. The more we use phones, tablets, watch television in bed, that's going to have a negative effect. So if we can reduce screen time, or even just putting it in the night mode where it's a dimmed screen, or you can get blue light glasses, things like that, that will help. But if we can reduce our screen time, even better. Go back to reading a book, or simple things, chat to your partner, read a book, listen to some relaxing music, rather than constantly stimulating ourselves with screen time and information as well. That's the other thing. It's what you're looking at. Is it something that then triggers something in the mind to make you think and stimulates you in that sense just before you're meant to be going to sleep and relaxing?
Yeah, there's an analogy that somebody told me once, that the reels and TikToks on Instagram that we see, like the short version of things, it's like reading the blurb on a book. You never know the full ins and outs of the story, but it gets you interested. Then your mind's constantly ticking. But we just shut that book and we just go on to the next reel. So we're opening all these unopened blurbs and just constantly going through them. So when we turn our phone off, our brain's just in like information overload. And like I said, if you're trying to do that before you go to sleep, it's not going to be beneficial, because I know a lot of people can struggle getting to sleep sometimes. And if they're on the phone too late before bed, like you said, with work and stress, etc., that's going to have a massive impact on their sleep quality as well. Because stress is probably one of the biggest issues that I find with people making progress when it comes to the gym, when it comes to the recovery. But it's something that has a massive impact on the sleep, and the sleep is a massive part of the recovery as well.
Yeah, exactly. No, it is. Sleep is one of the four pillars, isn't it? When you
Yeah.
look at the four fundamental pillars of life, it's nutrition, movement, sleep, and relaxation. So, looking after the mental side of things with the relaxation, and then the physical sides with your food, your movement, and your sleep. But quite often we forget about our sleep.
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things I was going to ask you about with the blue light, would that have an issue if you was to look at this phone screen first thing upon waking? I'm assuming potentially with the circadian rhythm and you needing to have that sunlight in your eyes. I've always been taught that the sunlight in your eyes in the morning is what helps you set up for your better quality sleep in the evening as well.
Yeah, so light first thing in the morning can be brilliant. If you listen to some of the experts around jet lag, obviously shifting the circadian rhythm as they move time zones, it's using light at the right times to help you sleep and help you wake up. So, it's if someone's got jet lag and they're struggling to get to sleep or waking in the middle of the night, it's trying to remain in darkness. But when you are waking up properly and struggling to get up, it's just like, right, this is where you open the curtains, you get moving. And if it is a case of there's not much light outside, use artificial light, get those lights on, get the stimulation to get you, the body awake.
Yeah. What would you say is the biggest issue that's like a high performance athlete faces when they are lacking on sleep, when it comes to them progressing in their sport or comes to them progressing um, in whatever they're currently doing, what they're working towards their goal?
Do you know what? It wouldn't be one thing. It ties into so many things. If they're not sleeping very well, then they're not going to perform as well in training. So if they're not performing as well in training, they're not going to get as good at adaptations. So when we talk adaptations, that's strength gains, speed gains, skill gains, etc. They're not going to be making the right decisions when they're in tactical scenarios or things like that. They're not going to make the correct decisions if they're not well rested, and that can then spill over into the evenings, food decisions, routines, things like that. So there's quite a few factors that can be impacted by poor sleep, and this is what we quite often see on a daily basis for people.
Yeah, there's a study I read a couple of weeks ago about the hormone ghrelin, the hunger hormone that kicks out the response before we eat our meals, that it spikes when we have a worse quality sleep. I'm not 100% sure what type of sleep it has to be for your hunger hormone to spike. I just know that if you're having less than what you should be having, that hormone will start to creep up. And then obviously, when you go into the next day, like you just alluded to, you're going to be craving or you're going to be wanting to eat more ultra processed foods opposed to good quality foods than you would normally because you feel like your body needs it. And that could be potentially one of the reasons why sleep hours at an average are at the all-time lowest in the UK. And then like the obesity crisis is probably at an all-time high in the UK.
Yeah, I think we're in a world of overstimulation, and not just caffeine. I think like we alluded to information and things like that, and then there's a lot of poor nutrition out there as well. So if we're having a lot of stimulation and not sleeping properly, and then we're going to lead to poor decisions around lifestyle, and that comes to the food and drink. Well, I'm not going to go and spend the time cooking. I'm going to just grab something quick and easy. Now, quick and easy can be good. There's companies out there like, I don't know if you've seen them when working with your clients, but Gold Standard Nutrition, the little GSN pots that they're available, they're great. They're clean and they're quick and easy, but not everyone has heard of them. So they might go for, well, I'll bang some chicken nuggets and smiley faces in the oven for 20 minutes, and that's me done. It's not the best nutrition, is it? But it tends to lead to wanting more of those flavors, and then overeating.
Yeah, and honestly, I think it's insane because at the moment in time where we're at now, I don't think it could be easier for people to know what is right to do because there's so much information out there. I don't think it could be easier for you to have better quality sleep because of people like yourselves who are bringing out amazing products, which they may not have had years ago. And I don't think it could be easier for people to get in shape and perform well because of the access to different sports, different gyms, and like the level of kit that are in these gyms now around the areas that we live. But it's also the easiest it's ever been for people to reach for the ultra processed foods, to look for distractions, and to be overstimulated with the wrong information. It's like the just this really long continuum of you can either be at the very good end or the very bad end, and there's not much in between.
Yeah, that's it. And it's going to take time to bridge that gap, isn't it? And it's one of the battles that people like ourselves are trying to fight. We're trying to bring people from one end to the other and meet in the middle.
Yeah, because obviously we may have some people listening now who are thinking, shut up, mate. I work nights every night. I've got an absolutely unbelievably busy job. I've got two kids, blah, 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 and I'm not going to be able to get my sleep in. And there was something that I looked at, like sleep debt. So would there be a way for potentially some people to look at accumulating their sleep up potentially towards the end of the week or nights where they could have more sleep? And would this still have a positive effect, or does it not work out as good as what people make out it does?
No, there is research supporting the use of napping, to improve your sleep if you have had substandard sleep, and also sort of accumulating that sleep on days off. So if someone is doing, say, a 4-on-3-off shift pattern or something like that, then on their days off they could make up a bit of sleep in that sense. But then also things like with the shift working, it's looking at what can we do to support the quality of your sleep and maximize what you are, because when you look at sleep, we can't necessarily say everyone's got the opportunity to have that 8-hour window because of their responsibilities, if they're fitting in everything that they need to fit in. But is there a way to maximize your deep sleep cycles, your REM phase, and can we reduce sleep latency? And that's where nutrition can come into it, but then also other practices as well. So, some people using the basic research of having a hot shower before bed can improve the time it takes you to get to sleep. There's some things around using cold plunges as well. So it's quite funny because there's hot and cold, but having those two things can both reduce sleep latency.
Yeah, and how important would the time before bed with the hot and cold would you recommend be?
Do you know what? I personally haven't looked into that too much, so I couldn't give you that answer now. But maybe I could go away and look into it, and then you could include it in sort of notes within the pod. But yeah, there is. I'm just aware of that. There's science around those two things, and improving sleep latency and sleep quality. But then there's all sorts of other things as well: mindfulness, meditation, and then nutritional practices. What foods or what supplements can you include that will help you sleep in that sense? Or when we talk about caffeine, what can you exclude? Looking at sugars, fats, and caffeine, excluding it in a certain period before bed to help you lead into a better sleep.
Yeah, and like you mentioned about the naps, that's something that I've always known to be good and be beneficial in regards to making up for that potential sleep debt if you're not having that good amount of sleep at night. But what would be the ideal time for a nap? Because I know that there's times where you think, you know what, I'm going to put my head down for 30 to 45 minutes or maybe an hour or two, but you wake up and you feel worse.
Yeah. So naps have almost got different periods for the benefits of them. And I think the shortest is a 20-minute period. And there are, I think it's 20, 40, and then you've got to go up to 90, because 90 would typically be around a sleep cycle. But it has been recommended in the past that having some mild caffeine immediately pre-nap can benefit you coming out of the nap. Because if you do wake in a deep sleep cycle, you've got that caffeine in the body to make you alert. Now, obviously, the caffeine would take a little bit of time to act. I think we look at the quickest things would be caffeine chewing gum, and that's about 10 to 15 minutes into the system to give that stimulant effect. Drinking a coffee is a little bit longer. So if you were to drink a coffee and then go for a nap and set an alarm, then when you wake up, you shouldn't be in that groggy state. So I'm a big fan of naps myself. I always have been. But I'm to the point I can set a 20-minute alarm and I'll wake up and I'll feel fresh, and then I'll be like, right, I'm ready for the gym now, or I'm ready for this afternoon of 3 meetings. But yeah, I think naps are great tools, and you can see it now at airport lounges. They've got sleep pods. Some of the top sports facilities, they've got sleep pods so that in that window between an AM session and a PM session, athletes have got a chance to have their food and have a bit of a nap if they do want to.
And it's so important. But in that nap, what type of sleep would it be that you'd be getting? Would that be light sleep?
Yeah, predominantly light sleep. For the shorter one, if you're going for, say, a 90-minute nap, you're probably getting a full sleep cycle there. So your first sleep cycle will be light sleep, then predominantly a deep sleep cycle with a little bit of REM. But as the night goes on, your deep sleep cycle gets shorter and your REM phase gets longer. So if you're having a 1 sleep cycle nap, you'll be getting light, deep, and a tiny bit of REM.
Yeah. And I know that you mentioned it at the start of the podcast about the potential negative impacts that having like a lack of REM sleep would cause. what would be like the negatives that potentially having like the lack of deep sleep that you'd see in potentially the person who's high performing, or potentially the person who works in that corporate job? So I know a lot of people who are listening probably track their sleep. I know that I do, using the Aura Ring, and there's people who wear Whoop bands now, and there's so many different ways out there that people can have a look at those individual statistics of what type of sleep they're getting the most of.
Yeah, that's it. So deep sleep it's got cognitive effects as well, but it's more so also your physical repairs, your adaptations around stimulation from training, and things like that. And then throughout the whole sleep cycle, you've got obviously the restorative phase to the body. It's when hormones are produced, like you mentioned ghrelin earlier on, but our immunity's bolstered through that. People with broken sleep aren't going to have the same deep sleep cycles. And then obviously people with shorter sleep aren't going to have that REM phase. But with the broken sleep and not getting the full deep sleep cycles, we're not necessarily going to recover as better as someone who's getting a full cycle. And we're not going to adapt as well. So it might be that you're doing all this training in the gym, but where you're not recovering properly, you're not going to be getting those adaptations. It was quite interesting, actually, the day that I met you the other week, and we were chatting about sleep. I'd previously been speaking to someone there that absolutely loved their training, and they said, I don't have time to sleep. They said, I'll give myself 4 hours maximum, but I've got to train, I've got to work, I don't have time to sleep. And I was like, don't you feel tired? And they're just like, all the time, but that's why I have caffeine. And it's just like for those 1 or 2 training sessions that they're putting in per day, where they're neglecting their sleep, they're not going to be getting that adaptation that they could be if they just went, okay, I'm going to tone it back a bit and focus on my sleep to get a better sleep window.
Yeah, one of my first mentors always said to me that you can only grow as much as you recover, and I feel like he was referring to obviously building muscle mass, but that refers and is applicable to anything. Like we say the high rocks training, obviously, where I saw you last weekend. If you're trying to get faster in your running time, you're not going to be able to grow as much as your body can recover once it's done that 5 kilometer sprint that you did the day before. Then when you're going into that next session, if you are under recovered and you wake up feeling sore, you're obviously not going to be able to do as good as you did last time, because you're going into it at 50% worse than you was the first time that you did it.
That's it. And it's the learning effect as well. That's so true of the grey matter as well, and looking after our minds. So, when people are studying school, college, university, or beyond that, there's those learning effects there. We're not going to be getting the best out of that with our memory consolidation. And the same as working in an office space, when you're project planning, or you've got big meetings, presentations coming up, the prep work's not going to be as good if you're not getting that sleep in.
Yeah, 100%. And as a general rule of thumb, what would you recommend, or what would you say is the ideal time for people to be going to sleep?
Now that all varies on their day, depending on when they have to get up, the opportunity to go to bed. Now, if someone was going for 8 hours, then obviously work it backwards from when they need to be up in the morning. And that's the biggest thing, because I think, I'm 40 now. I don't quite see it as I used to, but when I was younger, the good stuff on TV is always later. So you'll stay up to watch something, and then you just neglect your sleep, because then you're just like, oh, I'm going to bed late, I've got to be up at this time to get to work. But now it is a case of, right, I need to be up at that time for work. Let's work it backwards if I can. Right, I'm not going to get the full 8 hours, but 7 hours will do.
Yeah. And sometimes it's taking that, it's having that self-responsibility to be like, you know what, I'm not going to be able to get the amount of sleep that I want to tonight, potentially trying to get the extra hour in the night after, or trying to prioritize that time in the diary or the calendar to be like, I'll try and get that 30 or 20-minute nap just to top up on the sleep that I've missed out on.
Yeah, and I think that's applicable to everything. We were talking before this about training and nutrition. I think, people might go away for a weekend to enjoy themselves, and they know with that they're going to overindulge. They're not going to do any training, and their sleep's probably going to be impacted. But if they're good either side of it, or maybe a little bit better than they usually are, it's all balance, and that's how we can find an improved lifestyle, is just balancing things out, going, right, this is a weekend where I'm heading away for a long weekend. I'm going to eat, I'm going to drink, I'm not going to sleep as much. But on the weekends leading up to it, I'm just going to be a little bit better. I'm going to work on my sleep. I'm going to do an extra training session, and I'm going to eat a little bit better than I would do normally.
Yeah, again, this is my personal opinion, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of people have that mentality that they won't try and fix something until it's broken. So potentially the person who gets to a point where they put on too much body fat, they're close to being in that overweight, obese category. As soon as the health conditions start to kick in, they're like, oh my God, I need to get to the gym and start losing this weight. And like you just mentioned, and I've never even thought about that for myself, if you've got a weekend coming up where you know you're not going to have as much sleep, actually taking it upon yourself to be accountable and be like, right, I'll try and get more sleep in leading up to that. I think a lot of people can have these holidays or events or weekends booked, have not that much sleep on those weekends, get back into reality where they're not having that much sleep already, and then they're trying to catch up and they're just constantly playing catch up for the rest of the week.
I think that's it, and I think it's a data thing. Like you said, we don't do it until we see that it's broken, unless we see that there's an issue. And like I mentioned, that as part of my nutrition role, I'm a phlebotomist as well. So for those that don't know what phlebotomy is, it's the taking of blood and interpreting of the results. And I'm seeing an increase in people looking for privately sourced blood tests. And people can be within weight and they can train a few times a week, but they are neglecting nutrition because they're lean or they're muscly, etc., or they're neglecting sleep because they think they've got all the energy in the world. And then blood results come back and they see things and they're just like, oh, I never knew that would have been the case, that this is wrong within my bloods, and I've had an issue here and I need to address it. And I think we're seeing that more and more, but without the data, people aren't addressing it. And I think that is a good thing with sleep now. You mentioned earlier, you wear the Aura Ring, people use a Whoop, others have got Garmin's or Apple Watches, but they're all giving sleep data. Now that we've got that, some people are turning around and saying, I actually need to address my sleep.
Yeah.
What are the strategies? Because speaking to some, sleep physiologists that I've worked with in recent times, when they talk about America versus the United Kingdom, there's sleep clinics there that people will privately go and book themselves into, and they'll have their sleep fully analyzed, and then they'll get given a list of strategies that they can implement, and they will go away and they'll implement the strategy that they pick, and then they'll come back and see how that's impacted their sleep. They might try another one, etc. But people are going out there to find what works for them, but from a measuring and data level.
Yeah,
Whereas
and data and tracking, it can have it can get its negative comments from certain people that it's a little bit over the top, etc. But I'm a strong believer that if nothing's tracked, it's going to be so much more difficult to progress. And it's the same. I'm imagining you've seen in sports performance with, if you just look at a football team, if you're losing every single game and you see that your points are going not the right direction, you know that something needs to be changed. And that's a very generic example. But the more data that you can have, and this applies to obviously seeing progressive overload when you're trying to progress in the gym, the more you can improve on those things. So if you're tracking, like you said, on the Oura Ring or the Whoop bands and things like that, you're looking at the areas where you're potentially not getting the most amount of sleep. Like when I spoke to yourself, my REM sleep was in the bin. I knew that was something that I needed to work on, and just educating yourself on the ways to better that will stop that alarm bell going off in 6 to 12 weeks time when you don't deal with the issue now.
Yeah, that's it. And I have some interesting conversations with people, and it's quite often it's, oh, I get this amount of sleep, and I'm like, okay, but do you wake up tired? And they're just like, yes, I do. I'm like, okay, so we could work on quality. Can we improve these sleep phases? And there was someone actually I was speaking to from another gym in the area who they're doing their hyroxes at the moment, and they gave me some of their data from their Whoop. And I said to them, I was just like, well, what about your heart rate variability? How are you seeing that change from using, they'd started to use Hibernate. And they said, you know what, I never actually look at my HRV and associate it with things like sleep. And they tailed back to using, looking at their HRV alongside their sleep data, from when they weren't using it to when they were using it. And they were just like, oh, my HRV's improved as well. And I said, yeah, there's so many more factors than just deep sleep that sleep has an effect on.
Yeah,
So
100%.
looking at that complete picture, and I think as long as people accept there's going to be days where, because obviously, like you said, some people will say there's negatives around recording things and using data. I think as long as you accept that there's an acceptable range and there's going to be certain times where things will dip, you can create strategies to correct things. Like HRV, like I just mentioned, if my HRV starts dipping, it's just like, right, what do I need to do? Am I looking after myself correctly? Have I been fueling myself? Have I been resting enough? Have I been sleeping enough? Or have I just been, at it too much with work and at it too much with training, and sort of burning the candle at each end in that sense? So that's just a good indicator to not panic that my HRV's dropped into the amber or maybe to the red, but it's a reminder of going, right, what should I do to address these factors? What's my strategy? And that's where a coach like yourself or someone like myself, we're not there just to go, this is your program from Monday to Sunday, and you must do everything on it. I think that's very much something I saw at the start of my career, that it was, here's your plan, take away, you should do everything in it. Whereas now everyone's a bit more, see the human first rather than this is, we're robotic and you do that. And it's, here's what we should be looking at it. But let's problem solve. Why are we not achieving these things? What can we do to tailor it to yourself? But yeah, problem solving plus data, that's how we're going to get the best out of people.
And again, for those people who are potentially really busy, like we've spoken about at the start of the podcast, who are thinking tracking that data is something that can't fit in, we're not saying that you need to sleep any more than what you're doing. This is to make sure that you can sleep better. I'm not sure where I've heard that before. I think that may have been a past podcast of a bodybuilder who always speaks about sleeping better instead of sleeping more. If you are somebody who has got an absolutely stacked diary and your calendar's full every single week, there are ways that you can still improve your sleep without having to make ends meet that are going to obviously disrupt your current schedule.
Yeah, we always see it in the training side of things, don't we? Of train smart, not more sort of thing. But it's the same with nutrition. It's from an eating point of view, do we necessarily need to eat more, or could we get a better source of food that has a higher yield of macronutrients and micronutrients? Sleep. We can't give you those extra hours of the day that don't exist. It's still a 24-hour day. We can't change that, but can we improve the quality? So it's the same with everything. It's we've got to work hard no matter what, but can we work smarter rather than working more?
And rather than working to the point where you completely burn out, which is what a lot of people do. But before we obviously wrap up this episode, mate, I want to really dive into the supplements and what Hibernate offers and the things that are in there that are going to massively improve people's sleep. And what information can you give on the product, obviously, that you've managed to produce that will help?
Yeah, so basically Hibernate came about from leading up to the last Rugby League World Cup. I had someone helping me from a commercial basis, and he would spend a lot of time with me because he was bringing some sponsors into the camp, and then he was helping me with the sponsors that I was coming in from a commercial point of view with the crossing the T's and dotting the I's. And he had a lot of questions around what I would do with the players. He was a former footballer, and when it came to sleep, he had a keen interest because father of four, had contracts in Asia, had contracts in the States, so busy working calendar and then also a busy home life. And he was very interested as to why I used multiple capsules from different companies, and then also there was players would use one or the other drink to assist with sleep. And basically it's because the way that I see sleep, you've typically got things like ZMA out there, which the magnesium and B6 will improve the quality of the sleep. You've got some that have got, say, tryptophan or 5-HTP that both elevate your serotonin pathway, which leads to increased melatonin, so helping you get to sleep. But from an athletic point of view, there's not that many options because of the product needs to be tested. It needs to be, proven that it's clean of any banned substances, so that the athlete or military personnel, firefighters, police, etc., have got that reassurance. So there's limited products out there. And one thing that I think is massive with sleep is the whole reduction in stress and relaxation pre-sleep. We mentioned earlier on the pod about people's busy minds and their stress levels. So if we can nutritionally reduce stress levels and sort of induce some calmness, it's that plus that sort of elevation of melatonin, like I mentioned, from something like 5-HTP or tryptophan or tart cherry. It's the combination of those things that are going to help get someone to sleep. And then once someone is asleep, we want to improve the mechanics of sleep. So magnesium has become very popular again. It's always been around, but it has spikes in popularity. And right now, people are becoming aware of magnesium and its benefits. But magnesium will improve the quality of your sleep. B6, chamomile, things like that. And then for me, that what's important as well is reducing people's potential disruptors to sleep. Now, we can't control, without someone using earplugs or closing the window, etc., the noise outside the room. We can't control the light coming out under the hotel door unless someone wears an eye mask. But what we can control is things like pain, restlessness in the legs, in the muscles, inflammation. So basically, from the conversations around the sleep products, it was just like, have you thought of producing your own? Which is something I had done from my time up in Scotland, where I led the Scottish Rugby Union from a nutrition point of view. Coming out of that, I was in talks with people around a potential PhD that would be around developing supplements and esports. That never came about, but we had started putting into ideas, and my thing is always that stress, melatonin, improve the quality, reduce disturbances. So my answer to him was basically, I have thought about it, but I'm just a nutritionist. I've got no money. I've got no manufacturing facility. There's other areas that I'd need to know, around legislation and rulings around certain, what you can claim on the packaging, all of that thing. And he said, well, forget about money. Who can you find that can manufacture? So I made a phone call. The three of us sat down. That person said, I'd also like to bring in my manufacturing guy. And it ended up the four of us formed Hibernate and spent just under 2 years developing the product before we launched in March this year. And we've got the product in both sachet form that you can mix hot or cold, which right now, that's probably the most popular because the mixing it hot on these cold nights, it's quite nice, it's comforting. And then we've also got it in a ready to drink can as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. And for those people who are looking out for the drink themselves or potentially wanting to get in touch, where would they go? Where's the best place that they can find you?
If they come on the web, they can go to drinkhibernate.com, and the only play is hibernate is spelt with the number 8 rather than ATE at the end. But we can add that into the text underneath, can't we? And then if they've got any questions, if they jump onto the Instagram, I'll admit the posts aren't fantastic. I'm not great at Instagram myself, but I am good at answering the questions, so they can just drop me a message on there and I can get back to them with any queries that they've got. Alternatively, I was just about to jump in and say, just alternatively, we've got just over 40 stockists now. So what they might find is that their local gym or physio clinic does actually stock Hibernate.
Yeah, amazing. That's obviously where I tried my first can of Hibernate, mate, and it went down a treat. I'll obviously leave everything in the description as well. And obviously all the links will be there for those people who are listening on Spotify and YouTube. Obviously any questions, always fire them over to me. I can obviously pass them on to the guest or fire them over to Ed himself, like you just mentioned. The information that you provided today, mate, is absolutely amazing. If there's anything that you'd like to add to potentially help somebody sleep tonight, what would it be?
Go get yourself a can of Hibernate.
And what a perfect way to wrap up this episode. Thank you, everyone who's been listening. If you've not already, subscribe on YouTube, follow on Spotify. Like I said, the feedback so far in these podcasts have been absolutely amazing. And any questions or any ideas for future guests or any ideas for future topics, fire them over to me on Instagram, and I'll speak to you soon.